Welcome to True Terror Narrative.
My name is Gregory, and this happened last December during a week I spent completely alone in my house. My girlfriend had gone to stay with her parents for the holidays, and I couldn't join her because of work. I live in a small, quiet town in upstate New York. The houses on my street are spread pretty far apart, and most of my neighbors leave town for Christmas. That year, almost everyone was gone, which meant I pretty much had the entire street to myself. At first, I liked the idea. I figured I'd finally get some peace, catch up on sleep, watch shows I've been putting off, and just enjoy the calm holiday atmosphere. But what happened that week has never left my mind. It still sits there, replaying whenever I think about being alone. This happened on my second night by myself. It was around 6:30 in the evening, and it was already pitch black outside. Snow had been falling lightly all day, leaving a thin white blanket over my yard and driveway. I was in the kitchen making a basic dinner pasta and chicken. My girlfriend usually handles the cooking, so I'm pretty bad at it. I turned the TV on for background noise, just to make the house feel less empty. Even though I liked having space to myself, I wasn't used to how quiet everything felt. While I was eating at the table, I heard something strange. It took me a moment to process what I was hearing. It sounded like singing. I muted the TV and listened closely. The sound was definitely coming from outside. As it became clearer, I realized the person was singing Jingle Bells. At first, I assumed it might be some neighborhood kids messing around, but the voice didn't sound young. It was an adult male voice. I stood up and walked toward the front door since that seemed to be where the sound was coming from. With every step, the singing grew louder. By the time I reached the door, it sounded like it was coming from right outside on my porch. I felt a tight feeling in my stomach, but I still thought maybe it was just a caroler. I opened the door, and standing under my porch light was a man who looked to be around 35 years old. He wasn't wearing a hat, and his coat looked far too thin for the freezing weather. But what stood out the most was how focused he was on singing Jingle Bells, staring down at my welcome mat as if he hadn't even noticed I opened the door. I remember forcing a small smile because I didn't know how else to react. I'd never had Christmas carolers before, and even then, I'd never heard of one person doing it alone. He didn't look threatening. If anything, he looked confused or slow. I even wondered if he might have special needs, because he didn't acknowledge my presence at all. He just kept singing. When he finished the song, I expected him to say something or leave. Instead, he took a breath and started singing Jingle Bells again from the beginning, in the same slow, off-key voice. This time, though, he looked up at me and made direct eye contact. My smile faded instantly. Something about it felt wrong. I stood there another minute, pretending to listen, hoping he'd stop on his own, but he didn't. He just kept looping the song. I checked my phone and realized nearly 4 minutes had passed. Finally, I decided I'd had enough. I thanked him politely and slowly closed the door. I thought that would make him leave, but after the door shut, the singing continued, uninterrupted. I went back to the table and tried to ignore it, but the longer it went on, the more unsettled I felt. There was something off about him, and knowing he was still right outside my house singing the same song made my skin crawl. I wondered if maybe someone else was with him, like a caretaker waiting nearby, but I couldn't see anyone else outside. The house felt invaded, like someone was standing way too close to my personal space. I kept eating, but I couldn't focus. The singing lasted my entire dinner. After about 10 straight minutes, it suddenly stopped. The silence startled me because I'd gotten used to the noise. I slowly walked back to the front door and looked through the window. I expected him to be gone, but he wasn't. He had moved to the end of my driveway. He was just standing there, completely still, facing my house. He wasn't singing anymore. Something about that was worse. It felt like he was waiting. I opened the door slightly and told him he couldn't be there and that he needed to leave my property. He didn't respond or move. It felt unnatural, like talking to a mannequin. I finally told him I would call the police if he didn't leave and shut the door. I watched him for another minute, but he didn't move. I didn't really want to call the police because I still thought he might be mentally unwell, and I didn't want to escalate things. Instead, I went upstairs, locked my bedroom door, and tried to calm down. Before changing for bed, I checked out the upstairs window. The man was gone. I felt a wave of relief and assumed my threat worked. I got into bed, turned on a lamp, and started reading to relax. About 20 minutes later, I heard something behind the house. I knew immediately what it was. The same man was singing Jingle Bells again, this time from my backyard. I jumped out of bed and ran to the back window. When I looked down, I saw him standing in the snow directly below my bedroom window. He was already looking up at me, singing while staring straight at my face. I slid the window open and yelled that I was calling the police. The singing stopped instantly. He stood there silently for about 3 seconds. Then he suddenly took off, sprinting toward the back door. As soon as he disappeared from view, I heard the most horrifying sound of my life. He began screaming at the top of his lungs. It wasn't a normal scream, it sounded animalistic, like a deranged death metal vocalist. It echoed through the yard and the entire house. Then came the banging. The back door shook violently as he slammed into it, kicked it, and yanked at the handle. I could feel the vibrations upstairs. That's when it hit me, this man wasn't just strange. He was trying to get inside. I called 911 immediately, begging them to send help. I stayed on the line while grabbing a baseball bat and backing into my closet. The operator told me to stay hidden. I could still hear the screaming and pounding downstairs, and every second felt like the door would give way. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Complete silence. I didn't know if he'd left or made it inside. I stayed frozen in the closet until the police arrived. They checked around the house and confirmed the back door was still locked. When I stepped outside, I finally felt like I could breathe again. In the backyard, we saw deep footprints in the snow showing where he'd stood under my window and where he'd run. Toward the door, the trail led into the woods behind my house. The officers followed it briefly but turned back, saying it wasn't worth going into the woods at night. They brushed it off, saying people act weird sometimes and that I should just keep my doors locked. Their lack of concern bothered me, but I was too shaken to argue. After they left, the house felt colder and emptier than ever. I locked everything repeatedly and couldn't relax. I went to my parents' house for Christmas Eve and Christmas. The man never came back, at least, not that I know of.